started. Seth is coming from another neighborhood meeting, so not at all surprised he's not here yet. And we will improvise until we get to it, because we do have some other things on the agenda. My name is Jane Bright. I am the president of the Southfield Neighborhood Association, and I welcome all of you. And just a couple of housekeeping things before we get started. One is if we would all silence our cell phones as a courtesy to everyone. The other thing is we don't normally do this, but tonight we are recording the session because we know that a lot of people are very interested in seeing what our mayor has to say. And I'm your mayor. Hi. What an entrance, huh?
You've been planning that.
Yeah, it's just, yes, you've been rehearsing. So we're just getting started with a couple of things. But we are recording the session tonight because I was saying that everybody wants to hear what you have to say and what the Climate Action Task Force is all about. For those of you asking questions to the audience, you will only be filling the back of your heads. And so we will be repeating the questions that everybody can hear. And I hope nobody objects to that because this is a public meeting. So. And we thought it was important to make the information available. How is the sound?
Keep it up a little bit.
Thank you, Wes. Couple of things. We have juice and cookies over there. I don't want to take any cookies home. So keep them. Restrooms are through those doors. And a couple things. How many of you are here for the first time? Great, welcome. Very, very happy to see you. And I just want to point out, on the back of your agenda is some statistics about the neighborhood. And people are sometimes surprised that we are 44% multifamily units in South Hill. People tend to think of South Hill as only single family. So I'm curious, how many of you are from live in multifamily homes? Yeah. So, we have a lot of condos here and there. So, anyway, so some interesting things and also some information about the neighborhood association. Let's start with, minutes. The minutes, we had a technical glitch with the minutes, so they are deferred. And any agenda modifications, we really only have two biggies, one being our new mayor and one being climate action. Anything else you want to put on? We have a few things on updates, miscellaneous, anything else, or suggestions for future topics. Let me acknowledge too some of our elected officials, as well as our mayor, City Councilor Mike Lillquist. And I saw prosecuting attorney Eric Ritchie come in. Who's Eric? Thank you. Welcome. Did I miss anyone? I usually do, sorry. And then Wesley, if you would give us our treasurer's report, please.
So we have $692.68 in our checkings account, $2,579.63 in our savings, $62 cash on hand. That's a total of $3,334.31. And then we have $510 for our Lowell School Fund donation.
Just a note about the Lowell School Fund, especially for those of you who are new. We have, what do we have? Was like 11 students or 9 students?
It was 12 in December.
12 students. 12 students, the number fluctuates, but at the Lowell School, which is our local grammar school, we always have homeless children. And years ago, I think Ray started it. Did you start this? Right. Thank you. Ray Ballard, our former president, started doing contributions to those children at the holidays. And we do that in the form of gift cards from Red Bar, because that's, as you know, it's food, it's clothing, and so forth. And a few years ago, we also discovered that the summer is often very difficult for these families. So we've been making gifts to them. And you folks have been incredibly generous, and I thank you all for that. And we did the 12 gift cards in December, and we will do another round in June. So we have, what you said, $510 already. So if you'd like to give me more, there's a huge, huge need. So again, thank you for that. And then just a comment, we always love to get volunteers in the neighborhood. People my experience with volunteer organizations is the work that gets done is the work that people care about and are willing to do. So if there's something that you want to do, let us know, and we will certainly put you to work. There's some chairs up front, there are chairs here and there. Also, just a reminder to please sign in before you leave, so we have some sense of who's here, and also if you'd like to pay dues, they are annual and it's the beginning of the year. So, let's get to our first item on the agenda, and I'm delighted to welcome our new mayor, Seth. Who are you, Seth? Long time, and we have some questions. I hope you got them. For example, some first impressions as mayor, and then also how you want to work with neighborhood associations and what we can do to work with you.
I'm sure you did send this to me. Does this make a difference? I probably does.
Yeah.
When was I here last? Was it October? Is that when we had the Southfield neighborhood Mayoral Forum? Something like that. Gosh, 4 months ago already? Just like that. My first impressions. Wow. First impressions. Well, first off, I love it. I really do. I won't go too far into that or I'll start choking up or something, but I'm still pinching myself. Let me just put it that way. I still have moments when a little joke with at council meetings. I sit next to the city attorney, Peter Rufato, and at the last meeting I had my council packet in front of me and it said, Seth Fleetwood, Mayor, and I wrote him a note. I said, is this real? And he goes, yes. It's a great experience. Former Mayor Mark Osmondson, I guess it was in August, called me up. He's lived in Nevada for some time, moving back to Bellingham, and he gave me about an hour of his time, and it was in some respects the best hour of the campaign season, just in terms of really getting insight from somebody who's been on the job. And the one thing he told me was that campaigns are about values and vision and policy statements, but he said the reality of being mayor is that it's mostly operational. And by that he meant most of the time in the position you're working with staff. Eric over here, lots of meetings with you, yes, I've enjoyed working with you too, I'll tell you that. It's just a variety of different issues that percolate up through the system and need consideration by the mayor. So far on the job, staff has been giving me briefings on lots and lots and lots of different subject matters. So that's something that I'm assuming will not be quite as intense as the months go by. New mayors, I'm told, and I'm learning now, by longtime staff, lots and lots of different groups and organizations and people want to have a meeting with the new mayor. And partly I think it's just to introduce and get to know each other. There are also some people who maybe didn't get something from the last mayor, want to try again. So I've been extremely busy. I've been working 10, 12-hour days for pretty much every day. Weekends are often booked. Last night I was at the Cornwall Park Neighborhood Association meeting. And at that meeting, it was a crowd similar to this, but on Broadway at what's that church called? The Fountain something Church. And lots of difficult questions just about practical realities of people being affected by things in the city. Parking issues. The city permitted a building and it went 2 stories up, and now someone's got a window looking down into my living room. You gave somebody a permit to do a demolition here, and they've removed the parking, and now everyone's parking in front of my place. That kind of stuff. There's just lots of questions like that. And it was, I couldn't really promise them everything under the sun. I said to them, I said, my honeymoon as mayor is officially over tonight. That's sort of how it felt. But it's an exciting job, and I'm enjoying every single day. I'm feeling very grateful. Yeah. Neighborhoods. So, at the last meeting I was at, the York Neighborhood Association meeting, there were a number of, hello Eric, good to see you. There were lots and lots of, not lots and lots, there were some people there who got a rather strong opinion about how the Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Commission can be utilized. There is a number of voices in the community who think that that organization, MNAC as it's known, could empower neighborhoods to do something more. I think there's a, I don't know if this is getting at the question that you're wanting to know about, but my first MNAC meeting that I will chair as mayor is next week. It was supposed to be last month, but we got the storm or the ice and cold happened, and so it was canceled. But my intention at that meeting was to have a conversation with the MNAC members. Is David here? I don't know if David Franklin. He's in Panama. Chris, the new alternate for the Mayor's Neighborhood Advisory Commission. So you'll be at that meeting next week.
No, I'm in Florida.
Okay. Right, that's okay. But the point of it, the object of it is to have a conversation about how they can feel better used. There are some people who want MNAC to be another role, sort of in the regulatory process by which we adopt various plans, neighborhood plans, comp plan amendments. Right now, as you know, it goes through the Planning Commission and their hearings, and then it goes to council and their hearings, and staff reports, etc. And I know there are some that would like to see neighborhoods have a larger role in that process. And that's a conversation that we're going to have on Wednesday. I'm open to considering some things. I don't know if I'm prepared to go all the way to changing the process by which we adopt comprehensive plans. I think there's already a pretty robust democratic method by which we adopt things of that nature, but I look forward to listening. I'll give everyone a hearing as to what they would like to see and give my honest opinion about it. I think the group that is empowered by charter to adopt policy in the city of Bellingham, of course, is the city council. And so there's a line that one can draw appropriately between giving neighborhoods a stronger voice than they presently have, but also not going so far that they serve as a veto and essentially usurp the appropriate powers of council. So we'll think about that. Is that the third part?
The third part of the question is, what can neighborhood associations do to be of assistance to you, particularly in your new role?
That's a good question. I thought about that question before. I mean, one of the ways in which organizations like this could be, I don't want to say utilized better, because it might be the case that this is already happening, but it's certainly an organization for neighborhoods that can serve as the means by which you go out and sort of express the point of view of neighbors on a particular topic, as long as they're getting fair and balanced information. So I think that's one way in which they could serve an important role, is getting a very well-informed pulse of what significant number of people in the neighborhood feel about a particular topic. And then having the representatives, whether it's you or an MNAC rep, come forward and convey to me that point of view. and I in turn can pass that on to the council, so it's certainly an important role in that respect. Yeah. So, yes, sir.
Do you have any sense as to how many of the neighborhood associations are basically dormant because, there isn't, some issue or, interest in being active and responsive?
I don't know the answer to that. Mr. Lillquist might have a better view on that, but I can, but there are certainly some neighborhoods, I think we have, 25 now? And there are some that aren't quite as active, although just thinking about my experience last year running for mayor, gosh, we've got to, I guess not 25, but 18. If I had to guess, I'd say it was probably 7 or 8 in my experience that don't seem to be active at all. Happy Valley's active, South Hill's active, Seaham's active, York's active, Laird Streets is active, Columbia's active, Birchwood's active. Roosevelt, don't hear a lot about Roosevelt. That might be one that could activate a little bit. King Mountain's active, Cordata's active. Yeah, I could go right down the road. Who's that? Fairhaven is active. Yeah. I guess certainly a strong majority of them are active. Yes?
Your predecessor made a commitment to come to all the MNAC meetings. Will you strive to do that also?
Absolutely, yep. I'll go to everyone unless I'm out of town or something. So yeah, definitely. Are there other questions? Yes?
What do you see the city's role in the waterfront development? I know there's a meeting tomorrow night to talk about the plan for building 3 condominiums down there, just south of Point Park.
Well, I mean, from the broadest level, of course, the city is the regulator, and we're also a partner in public infrastructure. So we have say in land use, we have say in the master planning of the facility that we did in 2013. So we oversee sort of the land use regulatory requirement aspect. But we're not the land owner. And I think, I thought about that question as well. I have monthly meetings with the port and Rob Fix, the director there. Obviously, we're a powerful partner in that. To what extent the city is going to have the ability to influence things is something that I will learn more in the coming weeks and months. That is, to what degree, if we have a strong opinion about the way that a development or a portion of the property is being built, and if there's a strong opinion on a subject and we disagree with it, to what extent can the city influence that? You know, we've got to be careful about overstating what that power is. But I would think that we're certainly empowered to express our views, and we have an ability to leverage what powers we do have in ways that might influence better outcomes.
Does the city have to issue the building permits?
Yes.
Can't you have a big influence?
Certainly, right, and it goes to the regulatory aspect. I had lunch today with an individual who owns some businesses downtown and expressed, as a lot of people who build do, frustration with the city. It seems to be an ongoing thing. Hello, Lisa. What ward are you?
York meeting.
No, what ward are you in?
Oh, what ward? Ward 5.
That's right, Ward 5.
Thought you were asking
Lisa
where I
Anderson, I'm
was.
sure people know, your new city council member. Thanks for coming over. Permit aspect. Yeah, there's lots that we can do and lots that we can influence is the short answer. We have a role in a lot of the remediations that are happening in Florida. We're an important partner in that. Yes, Scott.
since you become mayor, are you surprised about challenges that you could face in the coming 4 years or the challenges the city could face? And what are those challenges that either were a surprise or are just ongoing?
Well, I see challenges all over the place. First off, just operationally, they're not mundane, but just the day-to-day activity. I'm faced with complicated decisions pretty consistently, where there's going to be a constituency that's upset. I mean, the very question about to what degree do we empower MNAC and what roles we give them. Well, I'll have to make a decision in that respect. And there are some people who, and all I can do is try to come to a well-considered position and express it well. But it's going to disappoint some people. And that, as a sensitive person, that weighs on me. So there's challenges of that sort. You know, who to select for boards and commissions. There's not always, but often somebody who wants to be on and doesn't get on. That's that sort of thing. That sort of thing weighs on me. That's just emotionally an aspect of the job that has some challenges, but you know, got to make decisions. As far as the bigger topics, as policy goes, certainly the divide that we all know about in our city about precisely how we're going to grow and densify. There's a range of different opinions that largely seem to sort of balkanize between sort of two ideas. Sort of, do we densify within the city more or less? To what degree do we make changes that allow more densification in our neighborhoods or less? That's going to be certainly a challenge. I have a more, on that particular topic, a point of view that I think sort of blends concerns and passions on both sides, frankly, and I look forward to talking about that. I'm a believer that we have, obviously, a housing affordability crisis. It's not affordable for half the people that live here. Median income is somewhere in the neighborhood of $63,000. That qualifies you for an average mortgage somewhere in the neighborhood of, the detail exact, of $250,000 to $275,000. And there's just nothing, no product for that. So we've got a serious problem. And so we're going to have to, by some means, come to an agreement on, I'd like to see broad agreements in our community coming together around some big ideas about how we're going to proceed in creating more supply, greater mixture of housing types. So clearly we need this, the missing middle that lots of people talk about, those housing types that aren't apartment units but aren't single-family homes either. They're in the middle. Row houses, carriage houses, triplexes, duplexes. By some means, we're going to have to put those sorts of housing types in supply. And how we do that and where is going to be an issue. And I look forward to working on that one. That's going to be challenging. I like the idea of trying to mediate that, getting some people sitting down, people like yourself, Scott, in a room with some other people that have a different point of view. This is just one idea, but it's one that occurred to me as a lawyer. I've mediated lots of cases, and I think there'd be a role for an objective mediator who's skilled and can lay out some ground rules, check the egos at the door, recognize we're going to have a safe place to talk, and the things binding that comes out of this, and we're just going to listen and try to understand each other's point of view and see where we can get. But that's a big challenge. Good Lord, there's tons of challenges. I thought about it for a moment. I could identify probably 10. If that's an example. What's that?
You inherited challenges.
Yes, that's true. Yeah. Yeah. Thanks for asking that. Are there any other questions? Let's go over here, this is one.
So you talked a little bit about the port area and development there and ways that you could influence the procedure, et cetera. I'm interested more broadly in the downtown area, and I think about the hole that's now on Railroad where the buildings burned down, and other holes that may develop or could be redeveloped. And you were mentioning sitting down with builders and them complaining about government, which they always do. How do you see yourself proceeding, looking for a large, to balance the complaints of the builders with people who perhaps want a more intelligent design in downtown buildings and the way downtown is sort of developed as we grow and get bigger?
That subject came up at the Downtown Partnership monthly meeting just last month. I got invited to that to listen to the leadership of the Downtown Partnership group. It's a great group, by the way, and their staff. And we talked a lot about downtown. The question of the 2 sites that burned, those were all in Avalon and Clark's Feed and Seed and Coles, and those, interestingly enough, I don't know if it's not coincidental, but it's all a family. Yeah, and
One family owns all those buildings.
Yeah.
yeah, and well, I won't speak to any more. Heard a little bit about that, but there's been opportunity there. The day will come when that's developed by somebody, and it's a perfect example of the kind of conflict that we're going to see downtown. We got a little bit of it from the fires themselves. A lot of the people downtown on Railroad were upset that they closed the parking, and they're concerned that it's affected their bottom line. And so they're frustrated. So we had a big conversation about that. How do we kind of mitigate those sorts of issues that will come up? I'm a strong believer, a proponent of downtown being one of the places where we densify a lot. I think growing tall buildings is a good thing. I'm excited about the idea of tall buildings downtown. I'll be a mayor that supports creative public-private partnerships to make it work, where there's a role for the city. I love the idea that tall buildings downtown are going to, I hope, by some means, as a design process update that's happening right now, so we can hopefully improve the look of buildings, among other things. But that doesn't get to your question, but it leads to it. The point is that in the future, I envision a lot of building activity happening in downtown Bellingham. I see a lot of building activity happening in a lot of places in Bellingham, but certainly downtown. And we get to be that generation. Bellingham is committed to a view of growing towards more walkable communities, mixed use, lesser reliance on cars, that whole thing. And we're the generation that gets to do the inspiring work of envisioning that and planning for that. But we also have to suffer the frustrations of living through that conversion time. And that's just the way it is. And so we're going to have more frustrations as long as we allow it to annoy us with congestion and traffic. It's actually the policy in Bellingham right now to grow this way, which will have an effect on increased traffic and a lower level of service on some of our roads and our intersections. So what we talked about is the solutions, like how can we do a better job given the reality that there will be frustrations. And one way is bringing stakeholders together. That's something that the mayor can help facilitate. More communication, not less. A number of the people who I've talked to have said we're frustrated by certainly the impacts and the effects of things, like the business owners on Railroad, for example, but they're not closed to the reality that this is going to be something that increases. They said, we simply want better communications. We'd like to have a better understanding of expectations, for example. So I think one of the solutions is bringing stakeholders together on a more regular basis, saying this is what we're doing, this is why we're doing it, this is what we're going to have in the end if all works well. It's going to be a nice future. Walkable, tree-lined streets, hopefully thriving businesses, more walkability. Socially, it's going to be an exciting thing. But in the short term, there's going to be frustrations. And I think we can do better at how we mitigate it. Is that a long-winded answer? Sorry about that. Yes?
I think that's exciting, the idea of building more in the downtown area and really creating downtown. I've only been here for 7 years, and I'm very upset about the number of heights of buildings that are being built in the residential areas too. And I wonder what the city's permit process is about those things. I mean, there's some that are being built one block away from another building that's that tall and just blocking the windows of the buildings that are next door.
I know, it's a drag.
It's a permit process, and why are we allowing story upon story buildings to be built right next to each other?
Well, our property law system comes from England, which came from Rome. And, well, no, I mean, it's sort of true. Interestingly enough, though, the laws, the private property laws that we have in our system, you know, all the way down to China and all the way up to Mars, and it's so obviously we can use zoning in places to regulate that, but that also creates all sorts of challenges. I mean, we're seeing this on South Hill right now. All over South Hill, 17th Street between Douglas and Knox on the Bay side. I grew up on 17th Street, and it was just another neighborhood when I was growing up. It wasn't groovy South Hill. It was, you know, we had people that worked at the mill, and we had lots of fishermen, and all of that. And a lot of these small houses, step by step, are getting sold, and they're putting 3,000 square foot. We were just the first 4 houses, I think, now. Well, I won't get too personal here, but we're seeing bigger houses happening.
Yeah.
I don't know, talk to Michael about how you, he's the policy maker.
I was inquire and talk to you about that. It's been 10 years since I worked at the Clean Air Agency, but one of the huge things with climate change was having a good tree canopy for any city. Bellingham considers themselves very progressive. We have no tree ordinances at all on keeping trees or, and it appalls me. I live on South Hill, I've seen so many huge fir trees. Somebody wants a view, so whack, there it goes. And it's not just fir trees, but all kinds of trees. And we have no tree canopy policy, and it's a huge part of climate change. Maybe I should ask it after the presentation, but to me it's really important.
Time for putting in the streets.
No,
Well, just as it relates to trees, there is an urban tree plan that's being worked on right now. There is a goal to dramatically increase tree canopy in Bellingham. A year ago, actually about a year and a half ago now, the Climate Impact Advisory Committee that I served on, we got chosen as one of 2 counties in the United States to do what they called a tree protocol. They were trying to test whether or not tree planting policies in counties around the country could be instituted with the requirement of climate action plans, and to what degree would it have a meaningful impact in sequestering carbon. And of course, in a county like ours, which is 3/4 forestry, it would have a huge impact. county executive right now, as you probably heard, has a proposal to plant 1 million trees annually. But what they studied Bellingham, and what they found was that in our effort to reduce emissions, that a tree policy where we dramatically increase tree planting as far as carbon levels in the atmosphere wouldn't change things dramatically in Bellingham, but they mentioned an alternative benefit of having enormously increased tree canopy because we're warming slowly. You know, it used to rain in February, March, April, May. Well, it still is. But in recent years, it's been dry in May and June. It used to be a very wet month. Summer didn't start till July 5th when I was a kid. And my point in mentioning that is we're warming. And it keeps it 10 to 15 degrees cooler. So it's obviously going to be a really necessary aspect of the future of Bellingham. It's going to be greenification for health and other things, and just enjoying things.
Glad to hear that. Just that there's other cities that have policies where if you cut a big tree down, you have to go through a permitting process. And there's nothing here that I know of like that. You do. Portland has one, Seattle has one. You can go across the country, and that's why I know you're new in this, but it's just something that kind of has bothered me for a long time, and I see people talking about it when they were talking about this plan. And I'm glad to hear that there is something coming in the works.
What's the, do you have the citation on the top of your head? Okay. We're going to get that to you.
And Seth, we have, just so you know, on South Hill, somebody clear cut their lot when they weren't supposed to, and we got, and what, three other properties were damaged because of the wind tunnel, and the city is pressing charges. It's a criminal event, and the city is following through on that. So the city does take it seriously.
Can I ask you a question,
At their new dorm that they're building, they cut down a whole bunch of trees.
Yeah.
Big, which I thought was.
I have to find a new way to work now because there's a traffic lineup every day as they're doing the grading and clearing. Jeffrey.
South Hill, since 2006, has proposed at least 6 amendments to our neighborhood plan, from trees and views, ADUs, the floor area ratio, our work on the quiet zone, and one other one. And one of the issues that I think we've run across isn't necessarily the mayor or the councils, but it's city staff that we don't seem to get feedback from. They don't seem to have respect for neighborhood associations. And we're always faced with the idea that we're not representative of our neighborhood. Well, if we're not, what are we? You know? And I think that is a question that I think should carry to city staff. It's sometimes like playing tennis with yourself. You hit the ball over the net, and then you got to walk over there and hit it back, you know. And there's not a good dialogue with staff on that. And I don't want to criticize, because I think there's some great staff from Parks and Recreation and Public Works and others. But I'm hoping that's something you can do something with also, is increase the communication with staff as well as yourself and with the council.
Thank you. Yeah, I will. Every week I meet with the department heads and talk about things. I'll bring that up. We'll have that conversation and try to do better. I think there was one question, Mike. Go ahead.
My question concerning housing regulations. One of the city's regulations is that not more than 3 people who are unrelated can live in a home. I live up near the university, and I walk down a street, and there's like 8 to 10 vehicles in front of one house, 4 or 5 in another one, another 4 or 5. But to me, it's sort of obvious that they're not abiding by the city's regulations. And if the city has regulations, why aren't they enforced? I think, you know, it gives people the idea, well, you know, there's regulations, but nobody cares. So why should I care if I'm cutting down a tree or, you know, some other thing that you know, there's a regulation against? But
that's an absolutely fair concern, and I hear it all over the place. That's another issue early in my tenure here, but that's a conversation that I want to have. I'm sure, as in all things with the city, it's complicated in that we've got a large budget that's delivering services to a huge spectrum of people. Every line item in the budget has some people who would fight for it and claim its importance at some public level. So increasing staff to do more and better enforcement is an issue, but it's a legitimate one. I agree with you. All I can tell you is that that's a subject that I will take up and better understand, especially as we go into another budget season that's coming up. It'll be starting in earnest in the next few months. I want to better understand it. I mean, there's a lot of questions I'll ask. I don't know to what degree it can be better dealt with just by changes in how we deploy staff, what we emphasize, whether we do a better job sending out letters, enforcement letters. That's something that I'll understand better. But your point's well taken. Yes?
Speaking of students, the last statistics I saw were that our student population in Bellingham is about 17% of our total population. And when we look at their housing, I estimate that they occupy 7 to 8% of all housing units, based on the city's own data. Where we talk about adding density and addressing housing, what role do you see the state playing? And how would you work with the state to basically take responsibility rather than outsource housing to the housing city?
I'm familiar with that issue because of you. And it's a fair observation. What I can tell you is I think you know because you've spoken to people at Western. I had a meeting shortly after the election with some VPs at Western. That very subject came up. And I asked, can Western do better at supplying student housing on the campus to take up a significant percentage, thus making available rental housing for non-students, and thus dealing with the issue in that regard. One of the things they said was that that part of the experience of, right, you've heard this, and maybe others have, but this, it's a position that they hold. It's consistent with my experience in college, that college is the time when young people go out and for the first time in their lives, they go out on their own. And the majority of students at Western live in campus housing. And then they move on. So their answer seemed to be that it's part of the student experience. And certainly to some degree or another, on some level, there's some truth to that. I think the question is whether or not we could create more on-campus housing. Maybe have students live on campus for a longer period. By some means, address what you're getting at. That's another subject that will come up. It's a fair question. I mean, it has a lot of basic coherency to it, doesn't it? Have you talked to Sharon Shoemake and our state reps about this issue?
I've talked to them, and we'll talk. I have a real smart ass answer to.
Well, and it may be the student experience, but they can also start to learn responsibility about being a good citizen
Those two.
of the community.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, fair enough. Yes?
Yes, so there have been many studies which show that if freshmen, college freshmen, and sometimes sophomores are required to live on campus, more graduate in a timely manner from the institution.
Thus saving parents money.
Yeah, yeah.
And what? You just want the mic, don't you? So, I don't want to punt on this issue because I imagine somebody could come up with a perfectly sensible argument for why this is a city issue. Clearly, on some level it is. It relates to housing. The organization, of course, that could directly do something about it is Western, I would think.
It's the state. Western doesn't have a lot of involvement in their state policy.
Okay.
They don't want housing or cost of education.
Right.
You can't hear the questions, that conversation.
Patricia?
I have a question, yes. Is there an ordinance in our county, in our city, as to what proportion of the land that belongs to Western must be open space and trees, or can they crowd more buildings in and do some of the on-campus living space?
That's a good question. And I don't know the answer to that question. I'm sure there's a planner. I suspect that's the sort of thing that one could get directed to the planner that would know the answer to that rather quickly. But I don't have the answer to that. One would have to think that, yes, they have control over. I don't think they have dedicated spaces that can't be touched.
Because we really can't talk about on-campus, more on-campus housing till we know what those ordinances are, if they exist. You know, how much they can cover, how much land they can cover.
Yeah, it's a good point. One more question. Okay, go ahead.
How about a traditional winter question, potholes? I noticed that you do an outstanding job tracking and trying to fill the potholes. That's not my issue. Can we avoid these in the future by looking at the specifications for roads, or predicting that rebuilding a ceiling was going to tear up Bill McDonald Parkway?
My designee will answer that question.
I was hoping he was going to take more time. So my name is Eric Johnston. I'm the city's interim public works director. I've been with the city about 9 years now, and it's great fun to come to neighborhood meetings. I do enjoy coming to neighborhood meetings. That's one of the things I like about my job, is getting to come and work and talk to people that we get to work for. So even the criticism, I'll take it. I'm happy to have it. That's part of the process. It's one of the nice things about being in the public is we have public process. So it's nice to have. The question is about potholes, and maybe the broad description of what we do for taking care of the roads that we have in the city. And that's the targeted question, if you will. Yes, we'll fill potholes. If you see one, call us. We'll get it filled as quick as we can. So the city has hundreds of miles of roads throughout the city, and we obviously have a very limited budget. Currently, our entire focus on keeping our roads from falling apart is focused on the major arterials. Boulevard, Meridian, Lakeway, Bill McDonald Parkway, that's where the dollars are being spent to keep those roads functioning. We have about $2.5 million a year to help take care of those roads, so it doesn't go very far. We have one project a year to replace and resurface those roads. We do keep an eye on roads that are going bad, and the challenge is how do we make sure that we fix it before it is so far gone that we have to replace it. And that's a tough thing for us to do. The specifications that we're picking for the way the construction is put together, currently we're targeting about a 20, hopefully a 40-year life on that road, but that means at year 10 we have to do some work, at year 20 we have to do some work, and the dollars are getting smaller and smaller and smaller as the costs are going up and up and up. Unfortunately, not maybe unfortunately, but given our current regulatory requirement, when we spend $1 to pave a street, only about 30 cents on that dollar is used for the surface itself. A big portion of that is dedicated to funding for stormwater improvements that are required when we do the roads, and for facilities for sidewalks and handicap accessibility on the same streets. So as time has gone on, our dollars to street preservation have declined. The demand has gotten larger, and the requirements have made it putting less and less dollars actually with road surfacing and more dollars to other things associated with the street. So it's challenging to get to all of those roads. Where we can, and when a construction project directly impacts the street, we give that cost to the developer and they can fix that. that sometimes the roads just get worn out faster than we anticipated, and that happens from time to time. We will go out and fix them if it gets to the point where it's not passable anymore. We generally try to make sure that there's a target for the pavement condition. We shoot for around 70 out of 100. Residential streets, to be honest with you, are not funded. So we don't have any dollars right now in our existing budget to take care of residential streets. We're only spending money to restore and pave and renew the major arterials and the major collectors. We do spot repairs on minor streets, but that's it. One thing to note on street preservation is the majority of the funding for that is coming through what we call the Transportation Benefit District Sales Tax. That was voted by the voters 2010 timeframe. That's coming up for renewal this fall. So if that does not pass, then our dollars towards street preservation goes down even farther. So not directly to answer the question, but kind of a broad context, we do put a lot of attention to streets. You call the city, that number is 778-7700. Yeah, that's on any topic related to public works. If there's a street light out, if the sidewalk's got a crack in it, if your water tastes funny, if you're mad at a city staff member for doing something dumb in their truck, call us. We will respond to that.
Thanks for having me. It's been a pleasure.
Seth was at the York neighborhood meeting before here, so he has a very packed schedule, so thank you so much for coming. As Eric is setting up, about a couple comments, just to wrap up on the university, they are doing a housing study, and it was supposed to be done about 6 months ago, and they have committed to us that once it's public, they will come to one of our meetings and talk about housing. So.
Gene, all the talk about students in the university, the player that leaves out are the landlords and the property management companies.
Right.
And I know from experience they are not all lovely people.
No, I know, and that is my smartest answer. You know, if you're putting an 18-year-old up against a slum landlord is not, you know, in any event, that's something that we'll talk about, and so that is an issue that is certainly on my radar, we will, the university is working on it and will plan to come. In the meantime, another non-controversial topic. This is something the Climate Action Plan Task Force recommendations and so forth has caused a great deal of questions to be asked, many not answered. And so I thought we need to get somebody to come and not only present, but to answer the questions. I think, Eric, would you like people to hold questions or to ask during the presentation?
You can ask questions anytime. Let's try to stay focused on climate action. We'll get wrapped up that about 25 minutes or so, then we can go to other questions, because I'm sure there's other questions.
Thank you.
Thank you. So,
you can see the slides. Would you like to play the lights?
yes, I do have 18 copies of this left. I did only printed 20 out. If you'd like a copy of the show, here's a copy. I'll just start sending those around. Share it if you'd like to. This is a presentation. Obviously, I'm not Renee LaCroix. That was done by somebody else. This is a presentation that was given to the City Council on Monday this week. And what I'd like to do with this presentation is put into context where we are at with the city's efforts to respond to the climate crisis, the climate emergency. We are responding to,
Is that all right?
In broad pictures, the task force, hopefully this will put some things into context related to what the city is currently doing for responding to climate action and how the task force fits into that. And the first thing we want to share is that the city has been working on climate action for many, many years, dating back to the mid-2000s. And the first policy that the city adopted for climate action was adopted in 2007. And the city has been working on that in many different fashions since 2007. We fast forward to 2018, the city adopted a new version or an updated version of its climate action policy that had specific goals and targets that we wanted to achieve. That the city wanted to achieve. That policy was established by the City Council in 2018. Shortly after that, about 2 weeks after the plan or the policy was adopted formally by the City Council, after a public process, after the public engagement with that. The council also passed a resolution to look at what it would take to be more ambitious than the policy that was established in 2018. And that resolution, so take a step back. So 2018, we passed the climate action plan. In December 2019, the resolution was passed that formed the climate action task force, and they were specifically tasked to what's it going to take, or what would it take, how would we do it if the goal was to be much more aggressive in meeting our climate goals. So a task force was established. It was formed by a number of experts in the community. The utility companies were involved. A very robust process with that. And that task force worked exceptionally hard over the course of about a year and a half, and their report was filed to the City Council in December of last year. So, task force recommendations were delivered in 2019. Lots of talk in the community about what they're doing or what they're not doing. I do have a truck out front that I'll take your gas stove today. Sorry, that was not funny to somebody else. The task force recommendations, there's been lots of talk and lots of rhetoric, a lot of fact, a lot of misfact, a lot of perceptions, a lot of unknowns, but the task force recommendations, they are simply that. They are recommendations to the City Council on if the council so chooses to go to a faster, more aggressive response, what would it take? How could that possibly be done? So, task force reports get taken care of. The next step is then what do we do with that? And that's the deliberations, and that's the public process. That's vetting through the steps that the task force identified that could be done to move forward into a different level if a direction was chosen to be more aggressive in our climate goals.
Is this a budget item in the city?
Yes.
Can you repeat the question? Earlier when you mentioned there was only $2 million in the road budget, how much is in the budget for this?
Okay, so that's a very complex question.
Can you repeat the question?
So the question is there budget to respond to climate action? And some of this stuff I'd like to talk about that, because yes, there is budget to do activities and programs to respond to climate action. Okay, so this is the climate action plan. It's available on the city's website. If you do a search for climate action plan, you get this document. It clearly identifies what we're trying to do. That plan identifies a couple of targets, and a note. The goal for municipal emissions, this is emissions that come off of city operations. The goal is 64% from 2000 level. We met that goal. We exceeded it in 2012. In 2015, our actual emissions will continue on that. In 2020, the target is 70% of the 2000 goals. We're on target to meet those things, things we have been currently doing. The current policy says by 2050 to be 100% down to 2000 levels.
Could you go back one page? Yep. I think the fair answer is what's in that plan is in the budget. What's in the recommendations is not.
That's correct. So we are doing this. This is being pursued and being funded.
What's the number?
The dollar number? Well, I don't know off the top of my head.
I think we need to know that.
Millions. No, I would be. No. Well, let's talk about that. So the city is focusing efforts to respond to climate action in a variety of different areas. One of which is energy efficiency. And these are things similar to roads. We have to take care of the things the city owns. We own the museum, the city hall, the library, the pool. These are buildings that the city owns to provide services for the community. When those buildings need to have work done on them, we will always invest in infrastructure, equipment, building materials, lighting that is more efficient, that reduces our climate impact. Many times those upgrades are more expensive than just replacing in kind. So we have been doing that for a long time. I don't have a specific number because we don't call it out as a climate action item. We say this is a facilities upgrade. We need to replace a piece of equipment. In around 2011, 2012 timeframe, the city spent about $6.5 million upgrading boilers and energy and HVAC equipment in a couple of different buildings, notably the pool. So at one of the big energy users, keeping that pool warm, is the equipment to keep that pool warm. We upgraded that equipment with very expensive equipment. Our energy consumption went down quite a bit. So we do that across the city. We've been doing that for many, many years, and we'll continue to do that. The dollar value is millions of dollars. This is another one where we spent about $3.5 million. This was to replace the streetlights in the city. You've seen this. Some folks were excited about it. Some folks didn't like the lights. The reason we replaced those lights is specifically to implement the climate action plan, the one that was adopted in 2007. So about $3.5 million was spent to replace the existing lights with the new LED lights, the wider light. We spent a couple more $100,000 to have PSE change out their lights, and they're ongoing with that process. But eventually that will replace all of the street lights in the city with LED lights. That's about a 90% reduction in the power use of power lights. It's a big drop. Transportation. We spend money on vehicles. The police department uses a lot of vehicles. We just this last year purchased 12 new hybrid pursuit vehicles. So the Ford Explorers you see the police department using, they make a hybrid vehicle for that. We bought 12 of them. They should be delivered this next year. That's a little bit more money to buy that than the standard cruiser, but they use less fuel and they're better for the environment, and more importantly, they're consistent with the policies set by the city to pursue that. We're seeing more and more of that coming. The goal is to have the fleet electrified as soon as we can. They don't make electric snowplows. That will eventually come, but they're not available right now. You may have heard a little bit about this, electric scooters. This is an idea that is probably going to will come to the City Council this next couple of weeks, and looking forward to roll that out. We mentioned this because this is a way to have a different way to get around the community, whether it's a walking or a bicycle. It's an option for some people who would like to use it. It's been used successfully in other communities. We're going to pursue that. This will not cost the city any money. This will be 100% funded by the private provider, but we're looking forward to that opportunity to let that business potentially thrive in the community.
May I ask, who watches how those are handled once who's in charge of enforcing where they're parked and how they're charged?
That's a great question, and we will have staff assigned to make sure that we manage that contract.
I'm sorry, what was the time frame on that?
This spring.
But we don't know that yet.
We do know that yet. The way that this will work is that the city will allow for a private contractor to offer the service in the community. And it's their responsibility to manage manage their business, manage their devices, and use them in a way according to the rules that we say that they have to operate by. If they don't follow those rules, then we call them and say, take care of your problem. And honestly, if somebody's scooter is parked on your private property, you can either call the company or put the scooter in your backyard. Right? It's on your private property. This is helped to manage scooters in the public rights of way. There are challenges with this in some places about scooters being walking, handicap accessibility, and marking businesses. We are trying to formulate those rules to make sure that that is clear to the contractor as to what their obligation is to our community. But again, if there's an issue or problem, call 778-7700, and we'll try to deal with it.
Are the scooters going to be allowed only on streets, or only on sidewalks, or both? I see issues either way.
Correct.
Thank you for your answer.
So whether it's a scooter or a bicycle or some other form of mobility device, I see people getting off the bus and getting on a skateboard. Right? We want to find ways to encourage people not to take that single occupancy vehicle trip to go half a mile down to the grocery store to get a gallon of milk. Just walk, right? Or take a scooter or ride a bicycle. Find ways, and this is consistent with policy, find ways to get people out of a single occupancy vehicle. That saves impact on the roads, that saves us having to deal with parking, that saves the emissions, it's just a good idea.
Except they don't have helmets.
Some people choose not to wear a helmet, right?
I think we should just hold the questions because I mean, I like it here, but not all night.
We're cranking through. So this is transportation. This on this side over here. I guess it's this side over here. This is where we were at in 2010 in terms of dedicated bicycle or pedestrian facilities. This is what we've built so far, or will be built in the next 2 years. So major investments into bicycle pedestrian infrastructure to give people a place to use their devices, whether it's a scooter or a bicycle or something, in a way that is reasonably not going to create a conflict with you. And so this is moving forward. We're doing as much as we can, as quick as we can, given the money that we have to do it with. The funding for this is coming out of the TBD. Without that TBD funding, none of these projects would have happened. Renewable energy. So the city invested in solar projects. We just spent about $750,000. It was from a grant from Northwest Clean Air, the Clean Air Agency, to install solar panels on top of the water reservoirs at Walken Falls. So covered a portion of that water tank with a bunch of solar panels. We're actually limited on how many we could put up given the rules that PSC has. We're looking to do more of that and invest in more solar facilities on city buildings. The city participates in the Green Direct program with PSC, which means we're paying money to PSC to produce and develop renewable green power sources. Invest in wind farms, essentially, directly with PSC. We used to buy what were called renewable energy credits. So you buy credits on the market. We now have diverted that funding directly to Puget Sound Energy to invest that in green energy production. This is about a $200 million project. This will replace the aging infrastructure of the wastewater treatment plant incinerators. Those incinerators have reached the end of their life. They need to be replaced regardless. The city is choosing to invest in a facility that does it responsibly and produces a renewable energy source and uses that product for a benefit. We specifically call this the resource recovery project, as opposed to what we're currently doing, which is wasting that material through burning it. That's a $200 million project. And that will, at some point, be paid by the city and recovered through your wastewater bills. Green buildings, we do adopt the building codes. There's a new energy code coming to the state of Washington this year that has increasing requirements for energy efficiency. The first energy efficiency code was in, I think, the 90s or so. There have been several iterations of that. The next version is coming in 2020. One of the recommendations in the task force report is the city consider looking at electrification of buildings. So new construction should we require those buildings to be electric buildings and not have the fossil fuel component to them? That's up for discussion. That has not been adopted as policy, but will be vetted through that whole process. At the same time, the city is moving forward with new buildings of our own. This is a rendering of a building that the city is going to be building this year for the Public Works Department. It's about a $13–14 million building, 100% electric building. What we found is that when we looked at the cost of putting the conventional gas system in versus a 100% electric system, that the cost to construct it was the same. So consistent with city policy, we made the choice to use the all-electric building and not have the conventional gas boiler. There's a higher cost to operate that building because the power cost is slightly higher than for gas. But again, consistent with policy to reduce our emissions and reduce our use of fossil fuel, that is what we are choosing to do. Land use, we're continue to do things on land use to help reduce that impact for climate action. I'm going to skip through the community progress. The point there is that we're doing lots of things when it comes to climate action. And then back to this slide here. So again, we're here. And my point in kind of sharing some of that information is we have existing policy. We've been doing it for many, many years. And we have been spending literally millions of dollars to implement that policy, and we have been meeting our goals when it comes to greenhouse gas emissions. The next step is, over the next many months, and the council has formed the Climate Action Council Committee, which is a committee of council members specifically to look at this topic, is what more do we do? How much more aggressive do we become? Do we set more stringent policy to not have the goal be 2050 or 2030, but something sooner than that? And that gets to the heart of the recommendations, is how does that impact all of us in our daily lives, right? Is the city going to take away your gas still? Well, that answer is no. There are lots of recommendations. There are 50 recommended things that could be done. Some of them require change in state law. Many of them require change in local ordinances or changes in zoning codes. Those are not things that get done today. Those are not things that the city council can say, yes, we're going to go do this and then consider it done. Some of these things will take many years to vet through. Some of them will not be as draconian. Some are pretty straightforward. Some are things that we have been doing already been trying to do, such as parking. Many of you know that we're looking to install, to do managed parking in Fairhaven. That's charging for parking. That means you have to pay the parking fare at some point this year. That is critical to managing the resource that we have, and it's also consistent with climate action, because parking is not free. Somebody's paying for that. And part of that cost is climate cost. So a couple things that the Climate Action Task Force recommendations do not include. They do not require solar panels on all rooftops. That's not in the plan. It does not require you to replace your roof, so you have to put solar panels on. It's not in the plan. It does not require new windows. It does not require you to remove your gas fireplace or your gas stove. That specifically says in the plan, this is not included. What is included is, when it comes to this particular line, and one of the things that's been out there in the world of social media and some rhetoric about this is that potentially the city would look to electrify buildings for new construction, but we are not going to come and take away your gas stove or your gas appliances in your existing home. That's not even in the recommendation at all. There was some rhetoric out there that these measures would result in you requiring to upgrade your foundation. And that's frankly not true. That is not factual. So that's the end of my quick presentation. So the message I was hoping to deliver tonight is that the task force recommendations are a very thorough and robust report. But it is not the policy of the city. The policy of the city is the 2018 Climate Protection Action Plan. And we are pursuing that. We are meeting those goals that were set by the City Council. The next step will be, do we take those 50 recommendations, and which of those recommendations can we do? Which one makes the most sense? Is it affordable? Is it practical? And this is a side note, for all of the discussion about the gas appliances, one of the recommendations is to ban internal combustion engines in the city of Bellingham. It's interesting to me, just as a commentary, but that's not been picked up on. There's no question, nobody's bringing that up. We're worried about our gas stove, but what about my car? Anyway, so there's a lot of work still to do on this. This will be a continuing conversation. People, some on one side would want us to move forward now and do lots of things. Others say we're doing too much. As typically is the case, the city's in the middle, and we will find a pathway forward, but it will be a better, robust discussion over the next many months, if not years.
Eric, let me ask before we open it up. We have the list of things that are not included. What are some of the top recommendations that are included and that seem to be resonating as possible? And I don't know, Michael, if you wanted to jump in on this as well.
Well, staff is focusing on, I think, 19 what I call leading candidates, but they have not shared that list with us yet. So, again, this is in process. We've asked them to start going through that, and they haven't come back to us. Next meeting, I guess.
Maybe.
No, next meeting.
This will be an ongoing topic with the council, and Mr. Lillquist is correct. We have 50 recommendations in the plan. There's about 19 that make some sense. Many of those we are currently doing. Right? So when it comes to changes in parking policy, that's a recommendation of the task force. Some of those things are already in progress. Right? Some of the issues about this missing middle that the mayor talking about, and maximizing urban village zones. The city's been working on those land use activities for many years, and that will continue. So things that are underway, we're already doing some of these things. That's not new ideas. The energy efficiency and the building electrification and renewable energy and financing to encourage not just the city's activities, but private property owners to make those changes. Those are likely to see a lot more action than some of the other ones. One of the recommendations in the plan is to buy out Puget Sound Energy. Well, that's going to be a much heavier lift than a parking policy. And certainly I'm not the expert on this. I know where we're at and what we're doing and where things will go. I think part of the message that we need to understand as a community is that the climate is something we need to address. Right? We live here. It needs to be responded to one way or the other. And the city is pursuing it. And we are investing money into that, and we'll continue to invest money into that. This is the question, right? And that's a fair statement. So the comment was, I'd rather have my roads fixed. So one of the challenges for the city is how do we do all the things that the community needs to be done?
I'd rather have our future fixed.
We need to make sure that our water is still safe to drink, that our roads are safe to drive on, that we have sidewalks. And so it's all of those things need to happen, right? So how do we do all those things and do these other things as well? And that's the challenge, that's difficult to do. So, let's go. So we have a bunch of hands going up here. We have about 15 minutes, I think. So let's take maybe 5 more minutes on questions about climate action, and then other questions if you have them at the video. So let's go first here, and then there, and then.
Do you have any kind of regulation about people who idle their cars?
We have a policy of the city against idling, but there's not a regulation that would force a private citizen from idling their car. But it is city policy that city vehicles should not be running idle without a proper use.
What about private people?
We do not regulate that, no. Sure.
Just as you were describing the things the city has spent money on, many of those things save an enormous amount of operating expenditures. Have you tallied what the city has saved because of the investments it's made over the last 10 years in climate action?
Ironically, sometimes those savings aren't actually realized. So when it comes to the streetlights, the power consumption went down, but our operating costs and what we pay Puget Sound Energy to have those lights turned on went down fractionally. So not a lot. So it went down enough to pay the debt on the project, but not enough to actually save the city hundreds of thousands of dollars. Oftentimes we find on some of this equipment, like at the pool, our energy costs went down, but our maintenance costs went up. So I can't say one for one and it's where we are right now. The easy ones have been done, but we don't make money on energy efficient projects. We might break even, but we're still going to do them because it's the right thing to do. Question back.
Eric, isn't it though, it's over the years that those projects, those changes really start to add up?
Yes.
So we got to think long-term here.
Very long-term.
And how that in the end does add up to save.
Very long-term. The return on the streetlights is about 20 years.
Yeah, you mentioned that things that will not be required is removing a gas fireplace or a gas stove. I didn't hear you talk anything about gas furnaces or boilers, and that seems to be the hot item on social media. So can you address that?
To my knowledge, there's no requirement to remove your gas furnace or your gas boiler.
How about when the house is sold?
That is one potential possibility that would be up for discussion. But Mr. Lucas.
Actually, the task force removed that idea of requiring conversion at time of sale, but they kept in the idea of whenever your furnace wears out, that's when you might be compelled by new codes to replace it with a non-gas unit.
And that's not dissimilar to how the energy codes work, right? So currently, if your hot water heater goes out, right? To buy a new water heater, it's going to be a high efficiency water heater. You can't, or toilet, right? You can't go to the store and buy a 10-gallon toilet anymore. It's a little full of toilets, right? Those things change over time. Question here first, and then go back in.
How's the electricity made?
How is the electricity made? So Puget Sound Energy gets power from a couple of different sources. One is from hydropower, one is from wind farms. About 30 or 40% from the right on that. It comes from a coal-fired facility. Some of it's from natural gas. So in Bellingham, down in Cornwall, there's a cogen facility. At certain times of the year, PSC burns natural gas to produce electricity. So lots of different sources. One of the goals of the Climate Action Task Force is to convert to renewable energy and reduce or eliminate the use of fossil fuels to produce electricity. Question?
Yes, in both the task force's report and in the presentation to City Council, they said one of the big issues is affordability and also the amount of money that's going to be used to implement the plan and where that money is going to come from. They said we had no opportunity to resolve those issues. And to me, it sort of depends upon what the final elements of the plan are. But if the entire plan is implemented as proposed, it's going to be a hellacious amount of money. And I think the public needs to be aware of what the costs are. And if they don't know what the costs are, they can't make a legitimate, informed decision. If they know what the costs are and they decide to, full speed ahead, that's one thing, but if they don't know, it's disguised, you know, I think that's going to be a real issue.
We agree. We agree. Knowing what we're spending is important.
Yeah.
Fortunately, further, there's a fair amount of process we have to get through before we make decisions to adopt any of the recommendations. None of those recommendations have been adopted or are on the calendar to be adopted in the next week or two, right? It's over the next months, if not years. How do we do this? Does it make sense? How much does it cost? How does it get paid for? How does it affect the folks who can't afford the lease?
Yeah, and then who pays for it?
And then who pays for that? Is that how does that
and
get
who
funded?
pays for the landlords who are told they have to upgrade, but they cannot pass that cost on to their tenants? Yeah, that, you know, once again, it's in the plan. Everybody else pays for low and middle income and the landlords to, you know, upgrade their...
There are very, very few of us who have an unlimited checkbook, but all of us live on the same planet, and so we're going to have to find a way to pay for things. It is not going to be for free. Right? We're not going to respond to climate for free. There's a hand raised in the back.
Yeah. Some years back, the county council passed an ordinance about wind energy, and the sound from windmills can be no more than actually equal to what your dishwasher produces. Are you working with county council to allow windmill energy production in Whatcom County?
That's a new one for me. I think the city and the county, particularly the new executive and the mayor, are closely tied to the goals for climate action. I'm not familiar with that, maybe Mr. Wilkins is.
I broached that topic with a county council member over beer last week. I think there's willingness to relook at that issue. The task force looked at wind possibilities in Whatcom County, and there are a few wind possibilities, but we're not Southwest Washington. So we could get, you know, 5-10 megawatts of wind power, which would put a dent in our need, but it wouldn't do much. So I've been talking, it may happen. If it happens, it won't be huge, but it'll be something.
The other thing they're looking at is geothermal at Mount Baker. I don't know if you...
So the task force talked about alternative sources of energy, obviously wind power, solar power. The possibility exists with Mount Baker being a nice big volcano that you could do a geothermal project. There's been talks about tidal energy. Can you use the power of the ocean to get that? Things are going to change over the next 5, 10, 20, 30 years. It will be interesting to see where that goes. Yeah, I think we have 5 more minutes.
Yeah, and one question that I have is, this is going on. The recommendations are being refined. They're going to be presented to council. The council will do their thing. How does the public stay informed about where these things are, and how does the public input their desires, concerns, suggestions, and so on?
First, you come to a meeting like this. Right? You come to a meeting like this and reach out to the city and say, we want to talk about this question. We hear your concerns. We have the same concerns. We don't want to spend good money after bad. We want to make sure it's affordable. We want to make sure we're doing the right thing. We want to make sure that we're reflective of the needs of the entire community. So this is a good opportunity to express those opinions. You can always send an email to your city council member, to the mayor, to the city staff. Those do get read. They do get paid attention to. That's always an opportunity. You don't have to wait for a meeting to do that. There will be, at the city council meeting, hopefully, if not every meeting, at least once a month with the Climate Action Committee meeting, an opportunity to discuss an element of the Climate Action Plan. So one of the easiest ways to keep track of what is the city doing is to follow that city council agenda. All of those meetings, all of the information, all of the presentation materials are published and made available online. You can watch them in real time on YouTube. You can watch them, do the rewind on that. You can stay informed as to what's happening with that. I would not advise using Facebook as a source of information for what the city's doing on climate action. But the source of that information is on the city's website. Every document that was produced through the Climate Action Plan, every document produced for the Climate Action Task Force recommendations are all on the city's website. And go to the source. Pull the report up. Read the report. If you have a question about it, send an email to the staff member whose name is on that webpage. If you're concerned about a policy question, send an email to your council representative. Say, I'm concerned about this. Right? Those do get responded to, do get listened to. At various steps and points, particularly when things If you get to some zoning code things, there's a very, very formal process to change the zoning code, to change the building code. If you went to the point where we're going to require you to change your gas furnace at the time that it replaces, there's a very formal process to change that. That involves public hearing, public comment, and come to city council meeting or send an email. Those do get influenced into that decision-making process.
So just so you know, I think, and I'll look to Linda and Wes, I think our next meeting is May 13th, is that?
Yes.
Okay. So I will
May
look to
6th.
Michael Littlequist and Lisa Anderson to give us an update at some point and let us know how much time you want to tell us kind of where things are. And Eric, you're always welcome to come back. Do that. I think we have time for one more climate question.
So I have a public works question. Did you get what?
Is that a climate question?
Climate question?
About this.
Okay.
So did you do a risk analysis looking at threats to infrastructure, flooding of pump stations, things like that? Do you have a concept about that part of climate change?
We do, and we are paying attention to that. So we are currently working on a new model for sea level inundation or flooding. And that's specifically being paid for by the sewer fund to look at impacts to the wastewater treatment plant. It happens to be on the beach, right? So we don't want that thing going underwater if it doesn't have to. But that is getting to that particular point. And one of our philosophies in how we manage infrastructure is specifically to a risk and consequence model. Right? If this happens, what happens? What does that mean? We want to spend the limited amount of money we have towards the things that are of greatest consequence. On the paving, for kind of full circle now, back to the streets, the biggest consequence for road going bad is on our major arterials. The minor streets, the volumes comparatively are very low. 500, 600, 700 cars a day versus 14,000 cars a day. So the consequences are more severe on the arterials, which is where we focus on our presentation. It's a great question. I want to spend more time talking about that. Okay, other questions related to non-climate action and related to just general public works? Here.
I was just building on that question. Where do alleys fit into the scheme?
Not paving, we're paving arterials. Alleys, so the question is, how are we paving arterial alleyways and maintaining them? We're maintaining them, but not very well.
I had a friend who brought me home. He took me home one night. I needed a ride. And we came down the alley behind the house up here, and he said, "What a wonderful place to live." He says, "You get to go off-roading every time you leave the house."
I wasn't on the right side of life.
What is the status of the Daisy Road crossing up there?
That's a good question. So Boulevard Park?
Yes.
So the city has annual line item in the budget to spend about $250,000 a year towards implementing the so-called quiet zone. The quiet zone. And what that requires is that gates and crossings be installed at the railroad crossings from the south end of town to the north end of town. We are currently working on the crossing at F Street, up on the north side of town. We are under design for the crossing of Boulevard Park. That, in theory, would be under construction next year, but we are entirely beholden to the railroad's approach on how they respond to when they want to do that. The city pays the railroad to do those improvements. We do the design, we come up with the idea, we write the check to the railroad, and then they do that on their schedule. So they're not easy to work with.
It seems like that particular crossing has slipped. We had information that it would be maybe done last year, and now we're getting information that would be done this year, and now you're saying, this is the first I've heard that maybe
it's under design now. It's been under design for a little while. So when we start, but when the construction comes to bear, we're beholden to the railroad. Right? We cannot control when these things go out to construction. If they don't return our phone calls for 3 months, it's hard to get them to do something, and that's part of the challenge.
And we'll talk a little about what the port has done to get them to return the phone calls for the port, because some of those crossings are,
And that's a key element of this, is even if the city gets all of their work done, the port still needs to do their work, and that's...
You talked about Incogen to Cogen on the water. At one point, it's just operating as a power plant now, not a cogen. And there was at one point...
Cogen is peaking, right?
No.
Cogen is cogeneration, and that means that you're producing power from the generator and recovering the heat from the generator to produce that power as well.
Okay.
So it's a type of technology. They're not recovering the heat off of the heating system. That's not cogen. Cogen is where we produce power from the generator, and heat from that generator is used to produce power as well.
Anyway, my question was that at one point the city was looking at taking that steam because the cogen is really operating most of the time, and putting that towards town to use it for heating, is that, and then I thought I saw something that said, no, it's not feasible. Do you know where that's at? I don't know, but you would report it, or?
It's the port, and the port is investing in the idea of the district heating facility, but that is entirely on the port. First question, ma'am.
Given that it's useful to get as many cars off the road as possible, is the city working with WTA at all?
Yes. So Mr. Lillquist actually represents the council of the WTA board, I believe.
Yeah, there's 9 elected officials who serve on the board, including myself. I'm currently the president of the board. We face the same issue as any large entity. You can't just run empty buses, you lose money. And so we try to scale up service as best we can, just ahead of demand, which paradoxically is actually driving down our productivity numbers. We're actually getting lower productivity numbers, which we knew we would get because we're trying to be out in front of the need to kind of act as a magnet. But we can only go so far out in front or we go bankrupt.
That's time for one more question, please.
When is the Post Point conversion going to happen?
So we've already started. The design work is underway. So we've done like the first preliminary analysis, and that said, yes, proceed forward. We're now under the design process, which will lead to a permit from the Department of Ecology. It'll take about 2 years, I think, to get that design work done. We expect to be under construction, get the up and running in about 5 to 6, maybe 7 years. It's a very expensive project. It's a very complex project. I'm sorry, the question was where are we at with the Post Point resource recovery? When will we be up and running? About 5 to 7 years. I really appreciate the time. This has been great.
Just to remind you, there are 25 neighborhoods, so the staff members are often called up to work in the evenings and do these kinds of presentations. So Karen, thank you very much. A couple of things. Just to update on the port, there are 3 train crossings that are the responsibility of the port, and the south side safety area, quiet zone, all 5 of those crossings have to be done. Touring the city, Boulevard Park. The pedestrian crossing is done. There's the one at Bayview that Eric just mentioned. And the port, there's one that's basically a private crossing. That's very easy to do. The Harris Street is designed and funded and should be done very easy at the end of March.
That's what the port has told us.
Right, because it's just median, so you don't need all those crossing arms and some of those. You can do with medians just to keep people from going across. The big challenge for them is the ferry terminal because of cars lining up to get onto the ferry. So it's a very complex crossing, and they're working on the design, and they've been working on it, and they've been very responsive and very helpful. Eric, to your point about being a Seth, sometimes not being terribly responsive. Rob Fix, who's the executive director, went down to Texas and had a lovely chat with BNSF about this whole thing. And we invited BNSF here to talk about why they are not responsive. Funnily enough, they said of actions to speak louder in the world, and they declined the invitation. But they've been much better about getting information to the port because some of they own the right of way, or they have a right of way. And if it's work that has to be done in the right of way, only BNSF can do it. If it's on the roads leading to it, those we can control, and that's why Harris Street is happening so quickly. So we are optimistic that those crossings, and on the port side, will be done in 2020. So hopefully, once all 5 of those are done, then we will be applying for the official quiet zone designation, which is from the Federal Railroad Administration. So other topics. Question to you folks. At one point, there was some interest expressed in having more information about how property assessments are done, and I wanted to do this. The climate thing was so urgent, I wanted to get that done. Let me know if you're interested in having somebody come and speak about how property assessments are done and taxes calculated. And then, as Ray mentioned, there is a meeting tomorrow night about some development down the waterfront. Ray, do you want to say anything about that? Some of the changes, he's got the history and Where's the meeting? Do you remember where the meeting is?
It's, I think, in the city hall council.
In the council chambers.
I think it's either 6 or 7. But it's about them putting up 3 buildings that will be about 50 feet tall along the waterway, the dredged waterway, south of Wayfair Park. And it's going to be enormous structures, probably $1 million condos. And they're going to go over the plan that Park Court, who the Irish developer, the Scottish developer, has proposed. So if you're interested.
Yeah, if you're interested, at city council chambers, we think. So it should be online. You can go, I'm sorry, I meant to bring that with me, I forgot. Anything else before we adjourn? And the next meeting is May 13th.
May 6th.
May 6th.
That's an error, just on the agenda. Sorry about that.
It is May 6th.
No, it's May 13th, we just didn't change the agenda.
Okay, May 13th. Sorry about that. We sometimes have trouble getting the room. And let me know ideas of topics you want covered. Yes.
I would be interested in the topics on policy, Bellingham policy on dark skies. We eventually hear about dark skies and educate us on that.
And I know you brought this up in the past, and I keep pushing it, right?
There were, I think, 4 or 6 spotlights down at the pier on where Fairhaven Shipyard used to be that shine toward toward Fairhaven.
I can read by those lights up at the top of the hill.
And we talked to Michael Shepard about it, he's a port commissioner, and about 3 days later they got shut off. But then they turned on at the beginning of the year, and we called them again, and apparently the system resets itself each year. So he had them turned off again. Now there's a couple of lights on the barge that's tied up down. But the lights, the ports control have been turned back off.
Yeah.
They can thank Michael for it.
Anything else? Any comments, topics? Most of you have my email, and thank you all for coming, and thank you to Michael and Lisa.